my screen. Okay, so now can everyone see the Word document that says U.S. Census Records?
Yes.
Okay, and is the print big enough?
Yep.
Okay, good, because I can't tell anymore what you're seeing. Okay, so to start with, the U.S. Census records are taken every 10 years, and this started back in 1790. They only become public 72 years after the census is taken, so the next census records that will be available are the 1950 census, and that will be in 2022. So we have just about 2 more years to wait for those to be available to the public, but then of course they would have to be indexed before anybody would really be able to search them. So something interesting about census records is that it wasn't always April 1st. At the beginning, from 1790 to 1820, the census date was the first Monday in August. Then it switched to June 1st from 1830 to 1880 and 1900. Just for 1910, it was April 15th. Then it switched to January 1st in 1920. And since 1930, it's been April 1st. And it's important to know what date the census was taken in the year you're looking for, because people are responding to the questions on the census as of that census day. So the earlier records, which I'm not going to show today, are up until 1840. The only name you see on the census record is the head of household. And for many of these years, you only see tick marks for other people. And it's just based on male and female and different age ranges. But starting in 1850, you see the name of every person in the household with their occupation, place of birth, and value of real estate. And in 1860, it's the same questions, except they also ask what the value of the personal real estate is. By 1870, we start to get questions that give you more information about your family, such as if the person's parents were foreign born, and they also ask if you were born or married within the year that the census was being taken. 1880 is an important census year because it's the first one to identify relationships between household members. So even though in some of these earlier census years you have the name of every person in the household, you don't know their relationship to the head of the household. They may not necessarily be the person's spouse or their children. And so without those relationships, you're guessing in the earlier census records about the people's relationships to each other. Then the bad thing about the 1890 census is that it was destroyed by a fire in 1921 in the Commerce Building in Washington, D.C. That's where they were storing the census records at the time. And this fire broke out in the basement of the building where the records were being kept. And there were no backups, and pretty much all of the records were destroyed except for these fragments. There are some fragments left from New York State for the town of Brookhaven and for Eastchester. Now, sorry, give me a second. I can't find my scroll bar. There we go. It disappeared for a minute. If you had a relative in 1890 that was a veteran of the Civil War, there is an 1890 veteran census that lists Union veterans and widows of Union veterans. And this was taken at the request of the Pension Office as they were developing legislation for pensions for veterans. But unfortunately, if you lived in Alabama, alphabetically, Alabama through Kansas were destroyed. And so those records are not available for this veteran census. But New York luckily survived. And I actually found one of my relatives on this 1890 census. It was pretty interesting because it showed that he had been a prisoner of war.
Ooh.
Yeah, so my great-great-grandfather's nephew was in a prison in Virginia during the Civil War.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's interesting to see those lists. And if you didn't know that and found someone on this veteran census, then you could start looking for military records for that person. So the more modern group of census records start in 1900. And this one is very interesting because it asks the number of children born and how many of your children were still living when the census was taken. And this is the only census where the people put down the month and the year of their birth. You'll see in some other census records they ask the person's age, but they don't ask the month and year of birth, except on this one census. In 1910, they were asking if men were veterans of the Civil War. And also that year, they asked people how many years they were married. So this would give you some guideline if you were searching for marriage records for your relatives. And in 1920, you can find out a year a person was naturalized. And they also asked the language that was spoken by the person's parents. And for the naturalization years, sometimes they're correct and sometimes they're not. I know with my relatives, I've seen them put down different naturalization years on different documents. But, you know, especially by 1920, you're asking a person when they were naturalized and maybe they had come 30 or 40 years ago, and maybe they're not remembering exactly what year they were naturalized. But it still would give you something to start with. In 1930, I thought the interesting question was, do you have a radio in your household? And also on that census, they ask you what age you were at your first marriage. So you'd have to know, was your relative married more than once? Because they're not asking them, you know, they're only asking about the first marriage. So if they'd been married more than once, that could throw you off a little bit. And then our most recent census, the 1940, asks people where they were living in 1935, which could be a big help tracking your relatives. They also ask your highest school grade completed, and they have different codes for that. And they were also asking about employment, and they wanted to know how many weeks you had worked in 1939, because at that point they were, I guess, at the tail end of the Depression and trying to get an idea of what was going on in the employment area and how many people were back at work. Then I wanted to just show you, if you're interested in census records, this link goes to the actual instruction books, well, let's see. Oh, there it is. Okay, you can see that?
Yep.
Okay, so starting with 1790, you can actually open up the instruction books that the enumerators were given. And it comes in a PDF. So if you're wondering about certain questions that were asked, this gives you an explanation of what the enumerators were instructed to put on the census form. And then this other link actually gives you a list of the questions that were asked on each census form. Let's see. So like here for 1870, it gives you every question that was asked on the form. Because sometimes it's a little hard to read them when you're looking at them online. So I thought those were kind of interesting tidbits. Now, in addition to the population schedules, which is what we were just talking about, the government also occasionally had other census schedules done. And these three are probably the most common ones. The mortality schedule, which was recording deaths for the year previous to the census date. There are also agricultural schedules, and those would include information on the number of acres on a farm, the number of livestock, the crops you were producing, and the cash value of your farm. And the industrial schedules had to do with manufacturing businesses, and it was asking about the type of business you had, the number of people employed, and even raw materials that were used. And what I didn't have on the handout is in 1880, in New York State, there was also a schedule called the Defective, Dependent, and Delinquent Classes Schedule. And they only did it for 1880. And what it included was people who were considered insane, deaf mutes, blind, paupers, homeless, children, and prisoners.
Jeez.
So you never know, you might find your relative on that schedule. Well, especially
That's scary.
I took a quick look this morning just out of curiosity, and like there was a whole list of children in like a juvenile home, I guess you'd call it, where they had been put there for stealing, you know, a lot of them said vagrancy. And it was, and some of the questions were, you know, like how did the child get there? Was he abandoned? Were they turned in by their parents? It was quite, and it even listed the year that they were admitted to this home. And then also, you know, it includes prisoners. So if you had a relative that was the black sheep, maybe they would show up in this 1880 census. So, oh, and I have to backtrack a second. I also found out that in 1930, there was a merchant seaman census taken for 24 states, and New York was one of them. And they actually did a census of the men that were living on ships. So these were people that didn't have like a fixed address, and they were crew on a ship, and they took a census of these people. So I didn't know about that one either. And then, so with these, the mortality schedules, these agricultural schedules, these I've found on Ancestry.com and Heritage Quest. And Heritage Quest we always have free through the library. You can just put in your library card from home and get on Heritage Quest and Ancestry, which we'll switch to in a minute. That is free right now, and I've heard that it's free through the end of May, that you can use it from home. And then I'm assuming after the end of May, it'll go back to where you have to be in the library to use it.
Mhm.
So again, so you can, here are some of the places you can find census records: Ancestry, FamilySearch.org, which is run by the Church of Jesus Christ for Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons, and that's always free. MyHeritage is a pay website, but they have the census records. And if you happen to live in Suffolk County, you get that for free through your library. Heritage Quest, you can always get them from home. And Find My Past is another site that has them. But
Find
it's
My Past?
Find,
My Past?
yes. But that's a pay site also. So, and the reason you might want to look at something other than, say, Ancestry is because of the indexing. Census records are known for having rather awful handwriting for the most part. And when these are indexed, people are guessing, you know, what the first and last names are. So I used to go back and forth between Ancestry and Family Search if I couldn't find somebody, you know, hoping that a different indexer might see the name a different way. So that's one reason to check different websites if you can. So let me switch over. Let's see if this will work. Okay, so we see the library website.
Mhm.
Okay. So for anybody who hasn't been on our website, we're going to start at eResearch. I'm going to scroll down to genealogy. Then here we have, under Ancestry, you can see it says for a limited time access from home. So that's what we're going to use today. But just to show you, down here is Heritage Quest. This one you can always use from home with your library card. So we'll put in our card. Okay, so we've got our main screen for Ancestry Library Edition. And it's not identical to a pay subscription. There are less records on the library edition than if you had your own. But for the major record groups, it's really fine. There's not going to be a big difference. So today we're just going to go into census and voter lists. And I'm going to use my relatives here. Now, when I search on here, I always click similar also because of a lot of misspellings. And for our demo, we're going to say, I just want New York. And let's hope they show up the way they should. Okay. So we're going to start with 1860. So here's my relatives in 1860, but this is not how their last name is spelled. So because I checked off exact and similar, they're going to show up. But if I had just put exact, I wouldn't see this. So, no.
Jean, I don't mean to interrupt. You just have two
No.
questions in the chat if you want to get to those after.
Oh, thank you. I
Just so
can't
you
see
know.
the chat,
Yeah, I figured. That's why I thought I'd tell you.
and I can't, why is this not? I don't know why I can't click on this. Oh, stop. Okay. So, okay, the nice thing about Ancestry is they highlight the people that you're asking for. So when we get to the newer census records, there's a lot more people on a page, so it would be harder to find someone. So here's the people I was looking for. So they index this N, their last name ends in N, but you could see how someone might think it's a W when they're transcribing it. So in 18, and then along the top here, you can see the columns and what they're asking. So here's the question about the value of their real estate, their birthplace. In here, they're asking, were you married in 1860? And then attended school, cannot read and write. And then these, oops, sorry. This group of relatives was from, they were all born in Sweden. And if you hover over the occupation, usually, so they even kind of give you a transcription of the occupations here as a foundry hand. So let's go back. So I went in Ancestry, there is a way where you can make corrections to names. And I've been trying to go in under my subscription to change some of those misspellings so other people can find them. So in 1870, oh, right, I wanted to switch. My relative is down here. This is my relative. He was actually working at a hotel, and here he is with all the domestic servants and him at a hotel in Brooklyn. I should have showed you on the other one. At the top of the page is where it'll give you, what part of Brooklyn, the date that this census was taken, the name of the assistant marshal. Oh, I didn't even realize that. And so again, there's not a lot of difference between this one and the 1860. It's except over here, it's asking, it's not really showing you, but whether the father was of foreign birth and whether the mother was of foreign birth. And again, and it's asking about, see, now I can't see it. And it's probably male over 14. Yeah, because he was over 14. And that he's showing that his mother and father were born in another country, which was true. So in 1880, okay, so in 1880, their last name is spelled a really horrendous way. Really not even close to what their last name really was. And here, so now in 1880, you can actually see the relationships of the people in the household. So we've got my relative with his wife, his children, his sister, and his mother. And over here, now you're getting the exact country where the mother and father were born, as well as where the person was born. So his children were all born here, but he was born in Sweden. His wife was born in England. And his mother and sister were both born in Sweden. And his wife was keeping house. And he was, I think that's, whoops, probably railroad engineer. But the census enumerator themselves is the one that spelled the last name wrong in this case and not the indexer. So I can't blame the indexer on this one. And so we have no 1890 census since it was burned. So we'll go to 19. Now this one, this one is probably one of the worst looking census pages I've seen from my family.
Oh, my God.
It is really bad.
Oh, wow.
Here it is. It is pretty horrible. I mean, I knew who should be there, so I was pretty well able to figure out who was who, but it's pretty awful. So Mary, Fred, Beatrice, John, Charles, Catherine, who actually was, yeah. So they have all the relationships here, even though you can't read them. Son, daughter, son. See what, it's hard for you to see, but I just happen to know this. It's saying son of first wife and son of first wife for
Yeah,
these
you can see
two.
that.
You
Yeah.
can kind of see it?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
can see it.
Okay, and then here, Catherine is his stepdaughter.
Yeah.
So, because this is my great-great-grandmother, Mary, and she was his second wife. And her children, Fred and Beatrice, were their children together. John and Charles were his sons by his first wife. Catherine was her daughter from her first husband. And then over in this column, it's asking how many years they've been married. How many children did she have? 6. And how many are living? 5. Which is true because they had another child together who died before 1900. Now, when a family group like this is on the bottom of the page, it's always good to go to the next page, and I'll show you. And here also is his immigration year, how many years he's been living in the United States, his occupation, months not employed. So there's a lot more details now in 1900. If we turn the page, so to speak, and go up to the top, okay, and it's still, I don't know how it knows that, but Ancestry still has it highlighted, connecting her to them, which is true, because this is his sister. So she was on the top of the next page, and if you didn't look, you would have missed her. So that's something I learned along the way. Always look to make sure you're not missing somebody who's continuing. 1910. Go to these. See, I'm lucky that this group had a relatively unusual last name for New York, because I was able to find them pretty easily in a lot of these records. So this is actually his nephew, but so now there you can see in the marital status column that, like that little 1, so that's for first marriage, and you can see like this person below him, it has an M2, so he's been married twice. And again, it's asking how many years you've been, in the present marriage, how many years have you been married? And then number of children born and number of children living. So these are their 3 children. It's asking, again, about the birthplace of the parents, what language, do they speak English, their occupation, And down here, they're asking questions about whether they're a veteran, are they deaf or blind, do they own or rent, do they have a mortgage, are they attending school, weeks out of work, employment type. So there's so many more questions on this census than there were even, going back to say like 1880. You get a much better picture of the life of your relatives in the newer census records. Okay, go back to that. So again, sometimes it's not the easiest to read. So in 1920, this is whether they're own the home or renting the home. Again, there are questions about citizenship, about when people arrived and whether they were naturalized citizens and when that happened. And then all the way over here are the questions about the occupation and the type of job they were doing. And this was the age at your last birthday. And then I didn't point this out before, but along the side here, there's the street name. And then the house number is going to be this number over here. So you find the street addresses written along the side of the pages like that. And another poor image here. But this is my Uncle Fred, who ended up being indexed with an N instead of an F for his first name. There's poor Uncle Fred.
But
Then,
you really have to be a detective with this stuff.
Yeah.
well, you have to, in a way, you almost have to know what you're looking for before you go looking.
Isn't it interesting too? The handwriting, like before, was so beautiful. Now look at it.
It's horrible. I know.
Yeah. The other stuff looked like, I mean, it was beautiful calligraphy and everything. And look at this.
Yeah, it's just the luck of the draw, what you get for your relatives. And this is the one they're asking the value of the home this year, whether they have the radio set. And this was the one that has age at first marriage, which again can be kind of confusing. They're still asking questions about whether you're a veteran or not and what war you would have served in. How many weeks were you, I think this one is how many weeks you were unemployed. And were you employed at the current, time when they were taking the census? Occupation, which can't even read for them, but he was, I think this was engineer. I don't know. It's just a big mess. So yeah, so there's an example of a poorly done census. And then in 1940, our newest one, nephew. This one's a lot nicer. We can read this one. So in the 1940 census, they're asking you, where were you living in 1935? So their response was, we were living at the same place. And here he's got, this couple is living with their son in Queens. And again, they're asking about employment. How many weeks were you working? They asked what the income was. And some of these codes were apparently things they filled in the office after they went back. Oh, and this is hours worked in the week prior to the census. So he had a 30-hour work week, and everyone else has got 40, 44.
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm going to switch over. This is Heritage Quest, the one that you can use from home. And so here's where you could look at census records on Heritage Quest. And they also have those schedules I was talking about, the mortality schedule and those agricultural and industrial schedules. So I just wanted to show that. And then let me stop this for a second. All right, so they said there were questions in chat. Can I answer them?
I
Yeah,
have a question.
yeah, so they didn't do the agricultural schedules after 1880. So they didn't have any after that. The difference between Ancestry and Heritage Quest, Ancestry has an awful lot more content. Heritage Quest basically used to be a microfilm company, and they were bought out years ago, and this website was put together with some of their old content, but it's also connected to Ancestry in some way. So you're seeing a repeat in Heritage Quest of some things that are on Ancestry. Right, and if something's misspelled, you can change the names, which is good. Yes, there are separate New York Census records, which I could run through pretty quickly. Yes. All right, so let me switch back to the screen share. Let's see, where was I? Let me see if I can figure this out. Okay, somewhere up here. Sorry, just give me 1 second. I can't see my, okay. New York State Census. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So yes, I put this together after I thought about things. So here's a kind of quick run through about the New York State Census. It started in 1855 and it ended in 1925. It was supposed to be every 10 years, but that kind of fell apart towards the end of the 1800s. A lot of these census records are not available for all the counties. So what I kind of wrote down on this was the local counties that you could find for these different years. So in 1855, the ones that are available for this area are Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Staten Island. In 1865, we've got Suffolk County, Brooklyn, Staten Island. 1875, just Brooklyn and Staten Island. 1892 is Brooklyn and Queens. Then it didn't pick up again until 1905. And in 1905, you could find Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Westchester. And in the last two, 1915 and 1925, these census records are available for all the counties. And then the state decided in 1931 to discontinue with it. So originally they were taking it on the fives every 10 years, but then they just decided to do away with it. And this link to the New York State Library gives you the questions that were asked for these different years. So there was a lot more questions asked, say in 1865 and 1875 than in these other, in 1892, it was very little information. And not even in 1905, they weren't asking a lot of questions. So let me get off that. So I can go back here. And if I switch to a different set of relatives, I can bring up some of these older New York census records. Hopefully this will work. And then of course, Nassau County was part of Queens until 1898. So if you were looking for someone who lived in what's now Nassau County, if the Queens records are available for that year, you could find them in that. Let me see if this will. No, that was not good. That should have worked. Oh, sorry. I put it in the wrong box. All right, so we go to this one. Okay. Oh, stop. Okay, so here's an 1855 New York Census record. And with the New York State Census records, Ancestry does not highlight the people you're looking for, and you have to just scroll down and look for them yourself. But luckily, I just found them.
Mhm.
So these are my Scottish relatives who lived on Staten Island. And so you can see they're just asking their age. They do give you their relationship, where they were born, his occupation. And
Look how fancy that handwriting is.
it's beautiful, right? And whether or not they were married, which is good, since it shows the two of them were married to each other. And how many years? Oh, I had to turn my head sideways. Years resident in this city or town, which actually is very helpful for immigration information. So they're saying that they've been living in Staten Island for 8 years, which is, yeah, pretty much correct. He came in the 1840s from Scotland with his wife and most of the children here. So you can see these 3 children here were born in New York, where the other children were born in England, though he's from Scotland. He moved from Scotland to England, where he married Anna, and they lived there for a while and had the children, and then they moved to Staten Island. But you can, it's not a tremendous amount of detail. And over here, it's asking whether they're an alien or not. Not, well, that kind of alien, not the other. And whether they were naturalized citizens and whether they were owners of the land. So that's one of the older ones. I have 1865. it was harder finding some of these examples with my relatives. Okay, so here's these. Now this is actually my third great grandfather. And this one was interesting because in 1865, they had like this almost supplemental information. So in this one, they actually had separate columns for people who were in the military and listed them over here. They could have put someone here, the deaf, dumb, blind, insane. And here's one for men who had been enlisted. So you've got the current enlisted men and the ones who were enlisted. And they're over here somewhere. Here they are. So again, they have the relationships to each other. They were both born in Scotland, though apparently she wasn't. I think she was born in Ireland, and then the children were all born in New York. The RC is for Richmond County, and his occupation was a block cutter. And it's saying that he's a naturalized citizen, which was true. And I cannot even read what this other one says. Oh, owner of the land, sorry. And that he owned his property. And then we have to switch over to the other relatives. And I'll show you some of the newer New York census records. Okay, so, oh shoot. All right, so 19. Okay, so here's like a 1905 census record. Again, we gotta kind of hunt for people. But, so you can see like here's the street name is along the side here. And they really aren't asking a whole lot of questions in 1905. You know, the age, the relationships, where were they born? I mean, this one is helpful about citizenship, you know, whether or not they're a citizen, and their occupation. Oh, this one's nice. For inmates of institutions only. I hadn't really noticed that before. But compared to like some of the older New York State records, this really doesn't give you really a lot of details about the person's life. But let's, shoot, sorry. I've lost. Right. There should be more than 1905 showing up. Let me go back. Okay, sorry, 1910. Then, here's 1915, okay. So this is 1915 they have for all the counties. And again, it's really not much different than that 1905 one. In fact, it looks identical. That they're just asking again about citizenship, you know, and at least for some of these other people, you can see it's asking how many years they've been in the United States. If in this citizenship column, if it says AL, it means alien, and it means they haven't applied to become a citizen yet. I'm looking down here. So if they had already become a citizen, this column would say NA instead of AL. And the last one. Oh. Well, if you're interested, there is a 1924 voter list, but it's only for Manhattan. Okay, and then this is a 1925. And again, basically the same thing, except over here in 1925, they're actually asking them when and where they were naturalized, which is very helpful in looking for naturalization records in New York City. So here, this person's saying Brooklyn, these people are saying New York City, and giving the year. This person is an alien. So if nothing else, this helps regarding naturalization records. So let me stop. So that's my presentation. Does anyone have questions?
Yeah, why is it 72 years after the census is taken that it becomes public?
That's what the the Constitution law is.
Really?
Yeah.
I wonder
that's
why they
where-
picked 72 years.
I had heard, I don't know if Alana's heard anything else. I had heard something to the effect that at the time they passed the legislation, that was the average
Life expectancy.
death age, basically.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
Because, it's about privacy. So they, at the time that they did it, they were thinking, well, most of the people would be dead, but obviously that's not true, but when, it's based on the laws at the time they were written.
It's
Okay.
interesting, right? They were worried about privacy, but yet, like, what they called people, like servant, like it just, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and I actually took a look. They have the questions up online for the 1950 census already. And it's heavy on questions about employment, wanting to know what kind of occupations people had, how long they had been employed, were they looking for work, a lot of questions about employment.
What year?
1950.
Oh, so it's
I
after the
decided
war.
to take a look, just out of curiosity.
After the war, I think a lot of people were.
So a lot of employment questions. They also ask if your house is on a farm or a ranch. And if not, is your house on a place of at least 3 acres or more?
Wow.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's wealth.
And in another question where they ask your marital status, in 1950, they have a code for never married, which I hadn't seen before. They have codes for separated, never married, married, widowed, divorced. So, because usually it'll just say S for single.
Mm.
But in 1950, you could have put down separated or never married. So that's something different.
Yeah.
So, but you gotta wait. Gotta wait
Oh,
2 more years. It's always the big anticipation countdown.
Just take a regular one.
So I've gone ahead and
Not at the bottom of the lunch bag?
I've booked May 20th for another virtual program, and I was going to do naturalization records
Oh, cool, yeah.
at the same time at 2:00. And so we'll look at different ways, we can look at some indexes you could use and where you could find clues, like we just saw in the census records.
May 20th, you said?
The
May
20th?
What
Yeah,
day
it
is
could
it?
be Should be a Wednesday.
You'll send something out, Cal?
Yeah, a lot
Like it'll be
of,
posted?
it's on the calendar now, right?
Oh, okay.
Can they register, can they sign up now on, through the
I'm
calendar?
not sure if I put the registration on.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I
Alana.
think I did. I think it's there.
Oh, okay, great. And then it'll show up on Constant Contact too,
Yeah.
the week before. So I thought that might be an interesting topic to look at and see some of the things that are available. I mean, years ago, I went into Manhattan and went to National Archives, you know, to look for a lot of stuff that's online now. It's amazing what's been done in the last 15, 20 years, right?
Somebody just said, yes, it's open.
Oh, Gina. Thank you, Gina. Okay, so I'm going to turn off the recording thing.